The presentation is titled How to Secure Your Wireless LAN. My name is Philipp Ebbecke. I work for LANcom Systems in the Quality Assurance Department. Within this presentation, let me give you an overview what we are going to talk about. After a short introduction, we are going to talk about the basic wireless LAN infrastructure, including wireless LAN controllers, the basic security, special focus on the robust secure network element, which also leads to .1x or EAP authentication. After that, we're going to take a look at some optional features, in this case, fast transition, and protected management frames, because they are going to be introduced now in a lot of client and AP devices, since Wi-Fi lines made it a mandatory thing for certification. And a short outlook on Hotspot 2.0, especially to Release 2. And afterwards, there are some minor aspects I'm going to do on a short slide about monitoring your network and how to do proper RF design with aspects of security. And after all, I'm going to close with some final words. I don't know, Rick Farina is not here right now. If you want to see some Wi-Fi hacking, I guess he's the one you should contact. Okay, let's start with an introduction. We've already heard Internet of Things is coming. There are smartphone tablets out there who have the primary connection interface of Wi-Fi, so it's really important to have a Wi-Fi secured. Considering the RF signal, we all know it does not only stay within your enterprise building, it also travels outside. Customers or VARs want to do a really quite secure and easy installation of all this stuff. But if you want to do it and you want to do it secure, you usually have to stick to the standards, because if you do deploy something that's not within the standards, you're having troubles finding client support. And this leads to the chicken or the egg problem, where you don't know who implements what first. And within the next slides, you're going to see it's typically the enterprise vendors who are implementing stuff on the AP side before the clients are taking it on. And of course, some customers are always asking, what about our legacy support? Well, some other things I'd like you to keep in mind, especially since we are in Europe, and in Europe there are some more data privacy concerns. There's been the topic of Microsoft, who has been ordered to hand over emails that are stored in data centers situated in Ireland or other EU countries. There's an update to this one, where Microsoft refuses to follow this judgment, but we have to see how that plays out. After Edward Snowden talked about what the NSA is doing, the German government canceled their contract with Verizon. So nowadays, customers are starting to look, where is my vendor situated? Where is my data stored? All this is, I guess, more European-centric than US-centric now. And regarding security, this year at the World Cup, we could see the latest news where the passphrase for the management Wi-Fi SSID was displayed on a wall while a photo has been shot. So let's get into the details of wireless LAN infrastructure, starting with the wireless LAN controllers. Well, what are they good for? Usually they're good for controlling and configuring your APs, and to gathering some statistics of client connections. So for a smaller enterprise, for smaller enterprises, there's always the option to do a wireless LAN controller, not as a dedicated hardware for it, but as a software option for routers. So it's easy, or sometimes it's even APs doing virtual controllers. So there's always a wireless LAN controller out there for enterprise deployments. Well, wireless LAN controllers nowadays are also used to distribute the keys, in this case the master keys, for fast transition or opportunistic key caching. As I've shown you before, you do not want to do cloud Wi-Fi if you're really concerned about where is my data located and who has the control over my data. And from my perspective, I guess we don't need to do data tunneling, which just means you cannot do a standalone AP deployment. You always need the connection to the controller. The data needs to travel all through your network, and this leads to wireless LAN controllers who need to have dedicated hardware, quite expensive one, to do the job. Now, looking at the basic security, as I already mentioned, the so-called robust security network element. You can find this one if you look at beacons or probe requests via Wireshark or OmniPeak. It should be quite self-evident you do not want to use passphrases on enterprise networks. I know it's in utopia, we've heard it before, maybe the Internet of Things will move you to do some other stuff you don't want, but please use WPA2. I've given you some links here where you can see how easy it is to crack the other ones, and these don't add you support for 11N or 11AC, which is called HT or VHT. There are always customers, for example, a supermarket with barcode scanners, reaching out to you and telling, hey, I've got this old one, someone from Motorola said they might survive atomic war, you cannot get rid of them, they are only 11B and they only do WEP. If you have to deploy it, please separate them to the use case. Do they need to go to the internet, or do they just have to reach to a special server, try to isolate these devices and these security settings just for these devices? Okay, moving on to .1x, which comes from the wired world, not the wireless world. In my perspective, it's the one only choice for secure enterprise networks. Yes, it requires a radio server, but that should not be the problem nowadays. When you do security and authentication, it's usually based on the extensible authentication protocol, the E protocol, which has native support in most of the clients today, although there are some printers called OfficeJets who do not offer it. And of course, maybe we have to look at the Internet of Things coming. If we take a look at a flowchart, I hope everybody knows it. Have anyone not seen how a client typically connects to an AP? I want to keep this slide in mind. After a probe phase, authentication phase, association phase, the EAP phase is started. Depending on which protocol you deploy, different amount of packets is going to be transmitted between the AP and the radio server or AAA server in this one. And afterwards, the AP and the client still have to transmit their transmission keys they want to use for transmitting data. So if you take a look at this four-way handshake in more detail, we can see that the data transmission a client and an AP are doing are based on so-called transient or temporal keys, which are derived from a master key. These two keys are called pairwise master key and groupwise master key. PMK is unique for every authentication. So each time a client authenticates to an AP, maybe it's just initially connecting or it's roaming, you have to generate a new PMK. And from this PMK, the PTK, the pairwise transient key, is generated and is used for the unicast transmission, which means it's individual for each client, whereas the group transmission key and its transient key derived from the master key is used for broad and multicasts, and it's the same for all clients of the BSS ID. The PTK and GTK are stored on AP and client, of course, so they can exchange data. And there's the possibility of the AP to store the master key as well, which is called PMK caching. And it basically means that if we go back to slide number 10, we can just skip the authentication phase and move on and move on to the four-way handshake where we derive the transient keys. The PTK is usually derived by so-called nonces from the AP, the A nonce, but in this case it's called the authenticator nonce and the supplicant nonce. And the so-called AA authenticator's MAC address and supplicant MAC address. You can see the typical 4-frame exchange from AP sending its A nonce. The station then starts to generate its transient key because it's got its own S nonce. It knows the MAC address from the AP and of course knows the MAC address from its own device. After that, it sends back the S nonce protected by a MIC, which is basically a hash. The AP constructs a PTK as well, and afterwards it sends the group transient key to the client, and the client just has to act as transmission. Taking a look at the different EAP protocols, well, basically, what does EAP mean? You can authenticate via different methods, including username, passwords, certificates, or nowadays especially important for .11u with a SIM card. important for smartphone, tablets. There are some legacy authentication protocols out there which are basically using clear text, username, password, or some kind of hash version to transmit the data, and they are not secure. So nowadays, these methods are still out there, but they are transmitted inside SSL or TLS tunnels. There are also some weak EAP method out there, EAP MD5, EAP LEAP, which usually transmit the username in clear text, so everybody who's taking out a laptop sniffing around can get the username and start hacking the password. What does a strong EAP protocol mean? Well, they use two kinds of identity, an outer identity and an inner identity. The outer identity is mainly called anonymous, or you can basically configure whatever you want. But the real username is afterwards transmitted inside an encrypted tunnel. One of the most popular and secure EAP method is EPEEP, which means we're transmitting either a username and a password if we're doing MS Chat version 2. And we do not support any client certificate. And the other one, EAP TLS, which requires the client to have a valid certificate installed. And you don't need a username here.
Have you ever seen a valid use case for EAP TLS as opposed to just using EAP TLS straight on?
No. Yes?
There was a use case when you want to do Microsoft NAP. So it's a posture assessment, and posture assessment of NAV needs to be in a PEEP authentication. So if you want to use Microsoft NAP in combination with TLS, certificate authentication, you need to go for PEEP TLS.
Okay, I'm going to repeat Scott's question. He asked if there's ever been a valid use case for EAP TLS inside EAP PEEP, and I said no, I haven't heard of any. But one of the folks told me, okay, there's one use case for a Microsoft client to do so. We also got a microphone, so whenever a question comes up, please use the microphone so the people watching the video can also hear your question. There's EAP Fast, which is a nice marketing name because it's not fast, but it's flexible. It was invented by Cisco. And if we take a look at the security of this protocol, there's always a phase 0 where the client, when it initially connects, gets provisioned by nearly any server out there. So it just accepts anything that's coming to it. So if we can skip the phase 0, we can talk about, okay, this one is secure, but if we are allowing for phase 0, well, if you got a rogue radio server or something like this in your network, you could provision the clients. But if you don't do phase 0, it means you have to touch every device and install certain credentials to allow the client connection. Then there's EAP TLS, which basically means you can do a lot of protocols, not only EAP and also non-EAP methods for authentication. And this one also got client certificate support, so which means you can do mutual authentication of server and client. And finally, EAP TLS standalone, which is considered as one of the most secure EAP methods out there. It does require a client certificate, so mutual authentication is integrated in this one. You don't have to use username passwords. It is really important to have a secure and highly available certificate store, and you really need to protect this certificate store from any hackers, because if a hacker can get access to your private keys, your whole public key infrastructure is compromised and the security is breached. But as I said, you don't have to do username password authentication. There are some typically things found in the client certificate, like SIN, which is the subject alternative name, which could be an IP address, an email address, a DNS name, or for the subject common name, a host or domain name you can use. And of course, there's always the possibility to check against an LDAP or Active Directory binary. Now, as I've announced, there's also some EAP methods for SIM authentication, which is important for .11u or Hotspot 2.0. There's been EAP SIM out there for a longer time. It was based for second generation carrier networks, it has a short key length, and it does not offer you the option of mutual authentication. And there is nowadays Ebbecke, which means authentication in key agreement. It runs inside your SIM module as long as you have at least a 3G smartphone or tablet. It offers longer keys and also the possibility of client certificate or mutual authentication of server and client. So usually when you do security, there's always a dogma of, hey, we have to add some extra layers. As I've shown you, there are a couple of frames transmitted for the EAP phase, and now it's getting slower as it was. But that does not have to be the case. There's fast transition out there. We've already heard this one mentioned by Aruba before. Well, it basically means you're doing fast roaming. With .11i, you have to do the full authentication via radius on every handoff or every re-authentication of a client. And you could call .11r as PMK caching, so caching the master key at multiple APs of the same BSS ID or mobility domain, which of course reduces your number of frames you have to transmit each time a client re-authenticates. You can also skip the 4 handshake with fast transition. And there's also the possibility to skip some quality of service at mission control. You can either do this over the air or over the so-called distribution system or wired. Taking a look at the flow, if you're doing fast transition, you can see there's a connection already established between the client and the current AP. And as the client decides to roam to a new target AP, it will send out an authentication request, including the fast transition element. And as soon as it gets an authentication response from the target AP, it will then start its reassociation request. And as we can see, the nonces are integrated within this reassociation request. Afterwards, the AP answers with a reassociation response, also somehow acknowledging the given AS nonces. And afterwards, the connection is established. Some of you might know the OKC, opportunistic key caching. And we can take a look at the flow that's different to the fast transition, where we now see, okay, there's authentication request and response without any special element. And now not the nonces are transmitted within the reassociation request, but the so-called PMK ID, which is the ID of the master key. So we still need to generate the nonces, and so we have to do the 4 handshake before the connection is established. And also, as I've mentioned before, there's the possibility of doing fast transition over the distribution system, which basically means that the AP you're currently connected to has to send over the wired network's action frames to generate a so-called fast transition response. And here as well, the nonces are already included, so we can skip the 4-way handshake. Getting back to OKC, you do have to do the 4-way handshake. You cannot do quality of service and mission control. And the main part, it is not standardized. So you have to hope for a client to understand what the AP is transmitting to it. Taking a deeper look at the mentioned reassociation request from the fast transition, I'm going to get it in detail here. There are now a new AKM suite, which basically means, I don't know, someone was asking it before this morning, you can activate more than one authentication key management suite for your SSID, but it's also, the client has to understand that there are more, and he has to choose which authentication key management he want to use. And you can see the PMK ID is included in this one. And you can do fast transition not only for .1x, but you could also use it for PSK, which this one indicates here. There's also the element of the mobility domain. Basically, it means you can only do fast transition within the same mobility domain of client and AP. The mobility domain could be given by the wireless LAN controller. And taking a look at all the information that is part of the fast BSS transition element, we can see the nonces here. And who was the original owner of the PMK, so where did it be generated, where was the client initially connected to. In the reassociation response, we also see that the AP is transmitting the group-wise transient key to the client. If we do measurements, and we start with the authentication frame from the client to the AP, and we look all the way down to the last key message that is transmitted. This is the 4-way handshake. In this measurement, we were using ePeep, and we measured 298 milliseconds for the client to authenticate to an AP while doing roaming. And now we take a look at the same client connecting to the AP using fast transition. And as we can see, well, the amount of frames is reduced dramatically, and we are now to 20 milliseconds, which is reduction by 93%. There's a blog out there from Mike Albano, who also did this measurement for over the air, which resulted in 60 milliseconds for his test case. But he also did the measurement for doing it over the wired system. And we can see we add some kind of delay again if we are transmitting frames over the wired system for the client to roam to the new AP. Well, taking a look at the client and AP support, as we see, most of the enterprise vendors, if your name is not up there, I was just too lazy to look it up. And we see that there are some clients out there, especially Apple devices, iOS 6, they integrated this one. So everything from iPad 3 and iPhone 4S and newer can do fast transition. And there are some Android devices out there, especially Galaxy Note 3 and some Sony top-end smartphones, and the BlackBerry Bold 9000, which is one of the devices certified for voice enterprise, which includes fast transition by the Wi-Fi lines. I've given you the link to Wi-Fi line certified devices for this voice enterprise down here. Let me conclude to .11r. Well, we've seen it is possible to do a high level of security and a fast connection. There's a great amount of AP support, but we lack the client support now. Especially when we're talking about voice phones or latency critical, and they should roam very fast. I tried to find any VoIP phone that had a datasheet saying it supports fast transition, but I couldn't find any. Maybe you can name one or two. I'll be glad. And yeah, well, the Wi-Fi Alliance certification for Voice Enterprise did not really take off. So there are really just a couple amount of APs and client devices certified for this one.
A question.
Yes. Wait, there's a micro coming.
It's off, 1 second.
Yeah.
This is much better than having to repeat the question for sure. Assuming both the client and the AP support .11r, what would prevent it from working? What would cause them to fail back to a slow roam?
First of all, I've already said that the mobility domain has to be the same. And we can see if the nonces do not match up. That would also be a problem for the client starting transmission with an unknown encryption key, and the AP, or other way around, the client would not be able to properly decode the frame.
So pretty much it has to break pretty badly, or it has to cross mobility domains, otherwise it works great? My experience with Apple devices, it works quite well, but not in every case. Somehow the driver something messes up, and yeah, well, then you fall back to the usually full authentication, and then you're back to the about 300 milliseconds of authentication. Thank you.
Okay. Well, taking a look at protected management frames, which are now required for 11N, 11AC, and passpoint certification by the Wi-Fi Alliance since July 1st. They only certify for WPA version 2, although as it claims down here, you could also do WPA version 1, but no WEP support. It was invented long ago to prohibit so-called spoof disconnect attacks by either deauthentication or disassociation of clients, as we've seen by the FCC, by the Marriott case, and the other possibility of sending false channel switch announcement, causing the client to change its channel it's transmitting on. It also prevents forged reassociations. I'm going to get into detail that, but if you really want to know how easy it is to deauthenticate a client or disassociate a client, well, this is the frame you need to send. It just says disassociate. You need to have the AP and the client MAC right, but you can spoof that. And you do not even need to offer any reason code why the client should be deauthenticated, and, well, it just works. Management frames that are now protected are, disassociate and deauthenticate, and a lot of the action frames. Still unprotected are frames that usually occur before client and the AP start the four-way handshake. So all these beacons, probes, and all this, and some vendor-specific action frames that are not protected nowadays are still transmitted, not protected over the air. Well, what has been done for unicast management frames? The typically encryption method for WPA2 has been enhanced to handle management frames. The previously unencrypted frame header is now protected. We use the same pairwise transient key as before for the data frames. And we implement a second sequence counter, especially for the management frames. So replay attacks can't be applied. For the broad and multicast management frames, well, there was no encryption algorithm, so we have to invent a new one called Broadcast Integrity Protocol, or short BIP. There's a new information element with a sequence number and a hash to protect this one. And the BIP uses a new called integrity group temporal key for the transmission, which is also received during the four-way handshake. There are three options of deploying protected management frames. You can say, no, I don't want to use it. You can say, I want to do it optionally. And you can set this one to required or mandatory. I've given you the outcome of all the different options between AP and client, and if it's now secure or protected on the right side. You have to look at the RSN element within beacons and probe responses. This one is not deploying PM protected management frames, PMF, which just say, okay, it's a pre-shared key, and we have two flags in Wireshark: management frame protection required and capable. Required stands for mandatory, capable for optional. And now if you take a look at what's changing, if we're saying, okay, we want to do PMF optionally, this one is now 2 AKM suites, and the Wi-Fi Alliance has announced that there are a lot of clients having trouble if there are more than one AKM suite out there. But that's basically how it works. There is now support for SHA-1, which was used before, and SHA-256 now for the PMF required option. And if you do it optionally, it just says it's protection capable, but not required. And of course, this is going to change as soon as you set PMF to mandatory or required. Now, both of these flags are set to true. We only got the SHA-256 AKM suite. And we can also see, hey, now we got a new cipher suite for broad and multicast with the BIP protocol. Now taking a look at a disassociate frame, which is now protected. The protected bit is set. You can check this one here up or down there. And there's now a sequence counter integrated for this management frame. So how do we protect ourselves from the attacks? Well, the method that's used in this case is the so-called source address query procedure. And it protects against the forged deauthentication and disassociation frame, and also solves the so-called association logout problem. So let us imagine that the client has lost its key due to a card reset, for example. So it needs to reconnect to the AP, and it sends out an unprotected association request to the AP. And the AP will just react and say, I reject you, but you can come back in a couple of seconds, in this time X seconds. And afterwards, the AP will start to send out SA query packets, which are protected. And since the client has lost its key, it is unable to answer them. And after the comeback timeout X has expired, the AP will, first of all, send a protected disassociate frame. If the client is still out there and didn't have the possibility to answer the SA query, maybe too low SNR or something like that, it still is able to receive this disassociated frame and knows it has to reassociate again. Well, and afterwards, if the client starts association again, it now will respond with a positive outcome. In case of an attack, an attacker could send an association request, although there's a connection established between AP and client, and the AP again will react with an association reject and start the SA query phase. And now there's a client who can respond to this SA query, of course protected. The attacker is not able to handle the protected frames, and the AP will just ignore the frame, the association request from the attacker. All the way around, if we take a look at the client side, maybe the AP has lost its keys due to a card restart. And as soon as the AP receives a client transmission data frame, which he does not have any keys for, it will send back and disassociate because you say, oh, hey, you're not authenticated to me anymore, please start again. Well, now the client got an unprotected disassociate, and it starts the SA query procedure, which is again protected. It will then use again an SA query timeout, and if this timeout expires, he will then reassociate to the AP again, and they have a valid, protected management frame connection again. In case of an attacker now trying to send forged disassociation request, he's doing this with the reason 6 code now. Well, reason 6 just stands for class 2 frame received from a non-authentication station. As I've said before, maybe the access point has lost the keys. And now the client will start the SA query again and will ask, is this one valid? By starting the SA query. The AP can't answer this one protected, and the client just ignores the disassociation. Taking a look at AP and client support, well, there's now nearly all the enterprise vendors implementing it since they need it for the certification from the Wi-Fi lines. But taking a look at client support, Windows 8 has it integrated. We can discuss the market share of Windows 8. But there's also some client devices like the Intel 11AC card. Qualcomm has a long history of supporting PMF, back to, if you're familiar with Qualcomm chipsets, the Merlin one. And there's the Samsung Galaxy S5 and, interesting enough, the PlayStation 4, which are all certified by the Wi-Fi Alliance. I've given you the link here where you can look up all the client and AP devices that are certified. The conclusion is, well, it is now required for Wi-Fi Alliance certification in, well, one of the most important ones, 11N, 11AC, and Passpoint. It prevents the disconnect attacks. It finally adds some security to management frames. And well, today you should not do PMF as required or mandatory on your main SSID because we see there's still a lot of clients not supporting it or not supporting it properly. And of course, well, this is one option of disconnecting clients. There are two others, like, or not really disconnecting clients, but blocking the medium by control frames with a high reservation time of the medium, or of course RF jamming, which just don't breach your security but hinder a client connection or a client data transmission. Taking a look at Hotspot 2.0, especially release 2, companies of today are usually doing guest networks with a captive portal. May you like it or not. They are offering an open network for guest devices by using captive portal. And they try to avoid guest devices to access their enterprise network. Well, within the near future, because the Wi-Fi Alliance has just released release 2 of Passpoint or Hotspot 2.0 certification, we could really see that the company offers guest access via Hotspot 2.0. And you could now authenticate these devices either by a given network access identifier realm like Philipp at LAN.com.de, for example, or your mobile operator, T-Mobile, Vodafone, anyhow. With release 2, there's going to be the option of a client who's not been configured before to use any SSID that's offered by Hotspot 2.0 support, could be auto-provisioned by a server. So now it is possible if a client, a guest comes to your network, who has not any valid credential to join an SSID, could be provisioned and then leveraged to an encrypted guest access, which also still you want to keep your devices, guest devices, out of the enterprise networks, but you can now encrypt this guest network. What it basically does is, well, it offers you authentication by an internal server or external server, which could be again, network access based or from your mobile or any mobile operator you support. And the client is being informed via so-called guest requests and responses, which are transmitted on MAC basis, since the device has no IP address yet, it's not authenticated. And the AP will either answer the request itself or contact an advertisement server, wherever this one may stand. .11u was called interworking, and it's called Hotspot 2.0 since the Wi-Fi Alliance took it and made a certification out of it. As mentioned before, we can do mobile operator or NI NAI certification and authentication. We can differentiate between guest and employee devices. If an employee joins the network and has a valid NAI real, he could be leveraged to an encrypted enterprise SSID. The choosing of the SSID should be done via the given user credentials. There's been a great presentation by Dave Wright at WLPC in February. I've given you the link here where he's talking about all the details of Release 2 in Hotspot 2.0. And yeah, well, with Release 1, there's a problem. If the device does not have any valid certificate to use on or to have a choice which SSID should connect to, everybody who brings a device needs to go to the IT staff, and the IT staff has to put something on this device. Well, there's the Apple configurator, for example, out there, which offers you a lot of options, which authentication method you want to do, what's the domain name, roaming consortium, which are typically the mobile operators. And by giving this one and saying, okay, roaming to T-Mobile should be the first option. After that, you should connect to Vodafone or something like this. This is all implemented within these configurations. Taking a short look at the flow diagram, well, it doesn't add anything more special. You've got the guest phase where the client is asking for different authentication methods the AP can offer. And afterwards, it's the same connection flow of authentication association, and afterward, the EAP session, four-way handshake, and the connection should be established. Most of the enterprise vendors offer it today. There's client support in Apple iOS devices since iOS 7, and it's natively implemented in Android, although some vendors choose to disable the functionality. But the top and high-end smartphones from HTC, LG, Samsung, and Sony are usually certified for Passport. And I've given you the links to the Wi-Fi Alliance search for Release 1 and Release 2 devices. Concluding on this one, well, Release 1 is already widely adopted among Android and iOS devices. It offers you the authentication via internal and external servers. It offers you the possibility to encrypt your guest network as well. And it's also a great solution for BYOD. Well, if we are looking at Release 2 auto-provisioning client devices. Well, but as of today, there's the lack of Release 2 support. So we have to see how that's going to take off. Wait, there's a mic.
A remark on the sheet. Is it not 802.11u or is it
okay.
W?
No, it's 11u, my mistake.
Okay.
Copy and waste. Okay, some other short aspect on monitoring your network. Well, monitoring means you getting an overview of your current network status. It also usually offers you a history of status, events, logs, graphs, whatever of your network. But really to troubleshoot network or to see when is my security breach is usually means someone has the deep knowledge and the understanding of what's going on, which frames are important, which one could indicate an attack on your network. It should include not only your wireless network, but also your wired one, which typically means you need to integrate more than one vendor. You could do sensors for the RF spectrum or rogue AP detection, and you usually want to use the alarms and notifications. But to be careful with this one, because if your IT crew is flooded with notifications, they're just going to shut it down and say, okay, I don't care about any notification anymore. And this would mean, okay, whenever there's a real breach of security, they might not recognize it. Short slide on proper RF design. Well, first of all, as I mentioned before, your signal does not stay within your building. There's been a short TED talk, I guess it was by GT Hill, about fabric of a building. You could consider this one which walls I should use outside, or well, usually you don't have the architect on hand to say, okay, if you want to bring up this building, use this one, or this is fabric. But what you can do is you can use directional antennas to send the signal where you want to send it, and together with a feature of disabling clients below a certain SNR, you could really try to ignore or you can drop clients that are outside of your building. But of course, this one means you need to design and verificate your design, because you do not want to disassociate any clients inside of your building just because they drop below a certain SNR. And it also means you do not only survey your enterprise space, but also a little bit around it to see where are the hotspots, good connection options, something like this. Okay, I'm going to close now with some final words. We've seen that the enterprise security should be based on strong EAP methods. There's always a dogma of make it as hard as it gets to break your security. We've seen that there are a lot of nice features out there, but still a lack of client support for these features. So there's no one size fit all. If you're saying, okay, you need to protect the management frame, fast transition, I don't know, just use this EAP method, you always have to take into consideration which are the clients the customer is using. And when you do troubleshooting, it also requires a greater knowledge of understanding what is in the frames, what should be in the frames, and what is maybe manipulated in the frames. Coming to an outlook, there's been a presentation by Matthew Guest on the CWNP conference last month, where he was talking that the IEEE is looking into improving security of Wi-Fi. So my opinion is we will see a lot of improvement in security of Wi-Fi soon. And as I've mentioned in a short note, Hotspot 2.0 release 2 can really make a difference when it comes to guest networks or BYOD. But we have to see how this one really works out. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. My name is Philipp Ebbecke, and if you got any questions, okay, feel free.
Question regarding Hotspot 2.0. You mentioned you can use mobile operator authentication for the realm. Does it work also for visitors? So a visitor comes to Germany and wants to authenticate with his mobile operator from overseas?
As I've mentioned before, there is the, let me take a look. Okay, it's called the Roaming Consortium identifiers, which could be the mobile operator of the US, if it's supported there, if there are some called country codes and network identifier codes. If these one are offered, you could authenticate your client device in any other country than your home provider is situated.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Listen.
Do you think it's feasible to deploy a guest or a BYOD network today using Hotspot 2.0? And with the, the assumption is yes, your APs or your enterprise vendor supports it, and all of your clients are not going to support it, and probably for quite a while to come. If you were to deploy it today outside of a service provider environment. But if you're going to do that in your own enterprise, would you need two solutions? You'd have to maintain your old captive portal or your old, provisioning for your BYOD, and you need two solutions for some time?
Well, the beauty of Hotspot 2.0 is it is also working for legacy clients that do not support Hotspot 2.0. So you could really use the legacy method and the Hotspot 2.0 option on the same SSID. Legacy devices will just ignore the additional information that is given in the beacons and will not start the so-called GET request or response, and they just ignore it. So you could do it with devices that you provisioned before, but it also means your IT crew has to lay hands on the devices and install these certificates or the configuration to use Hotspot 2.0.
So the issues with 8.11 are where some clients break when you try and support, on the one SSID, so clients that support 8.11r and those that don't, that's not an issue in this case?
It's not that much of an issue, no. Not this one like OKC or fast transition one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, then I guess we're done. Thank you all.